May 13, 1940. 3:55 in the morning. The sky over Amsterdam turned to fire. German paratroopers dropped from the darkness. Luftwaffe bombers screamed over Dutch cities. Within hours, bridges were seized, airfields were captured, and panic consumed a nation that had declared itself neutral, a nation that genuinely believed a piece of paper could keep war off its doorstep. It couldn't. 4 days later, on May 14, 1940, the German Luftwaffe dropped incendiary bombs on Rotterdam. In less than 15 minutes, the historic heart of the city was gone. An estimated 800 to 900 civilians were killed. 78,000 people were left homeless. Entire neighborhoods simply ceased to exist. The Dutch army, outmatched and overwhelmed, surrendered on May 15, just 5 days after the invasion began. Queen Wilhelmina and her government boarded a British warship and fled to London. The Netherlands, a country that had peacefully survived World War I, had just fallen to Adolf Hitler in less time than it takes most people to finish a work week. What followed was 5 years of brutal occupation, starvation, and systematic genocide. But here's what history books often skip over. The occupation didn't just work because of German soldiers. It worked because some Dutch citizens helped it work. Opened doors. Handed over names. Signed documents. Smiled at the camera. And no one did it more openly, more enthusiastically, and more unapologetically than the woman at the center of today's story. This is the kind of story that gets buried, the kind that powerful people would rather you never find. That's exactly why The Untold Wars exists. To dig it back up, subscribe right now. Hit that bell. You will not want to miss what comes next. Her name, at birth, was Florentine Sophie Hobel, born on November 14, 1914, in Amsterdam, the youngest of 4 children. She grew up in the leafy, comfortable Dutch town of Hilversum. Her father was German, a banker who had emigrated to the Netherlands as a young man, married his employer's daughter, and built himself a respected, wealthy life. The Hubel family was well-regarded, well-connected. When Princess Juliana, the future Queen of the Netherlands, visited Hilversum on a royal visit, Florentine and her brother Wim were personally selected to play tennis with the princess. This is the life she was born into. Privilege, access, respect. And she threw all of it into the furnace of Nazi ideology. While studying biology at Utrecht University, specializing, interestingly, in animal psychology, Florentine was reading Mein Kampf for pleasure. She wasn't assigned it. She sought it out. She also consumed the writings of Alfred Rosenberg, the chief racial ideologue of the Nazi Party, a man later hanged at Nuremberg for crimes against humanity. She didn't read these as warnings. She read them as blueprints. Her German heritage is believed to have been the original spark, but what kept the fire burning was something more personal. She found in Nazism a sense of purpose, identity, and moral certainty that nothing else gave her. By the early 1930s, she and her brother had joined the Nationale Jeugdstorm, the Dutch youth movement directly modeled on Hitler's own Hitler Youth, which functioned as the youth wing of the NSB, the Dutch National Socialist Fascist Party. She wasn't a passive member. She believed. In the summer of 1936, Florentine traveled to Berlin. This was not a vacation. It was a conversion experience. The 1936 Berlin Olympics had just taken place. The Nazi propaganda machine was running at full throttle. The city was draped in swastikas. The streets were alive with military precision and ideological theater. For someone already drawn to Nazi ideas, witnessing the spectacle in person was, as she later described it, electrifying. She saw the camaraderie, the discipline, the terrifying energy of total belief, and she wanted it. She returned to the Netherlands more radicalized than when she left. Her dissatisfaction with the NSB grew, not because she was moderating, but because she thought the party wasn't extreme enough. She believed party leader Anton Mussert was too soft on racial hygiene policies. So she left. She didn't leave Nazism. She left because the Dutch version wasn't Nazi enough for her. When Germany invaded the Netherlands in May 1940, Florentine was working at a zoo in Berlin. The moment she heard the news, she didn't grieve. She didn't grieve home and worry. She packed her bags and went back to contribute to the new regime. Her homeland had just been conquered, and she saw it as an opportunity. At a massive NSB liberation rally, where Dutch fascists openly celebrated the German occupation of their own country, she met the man who would define the rest of her life. Meinoud Rost van Tonningen. He was 40 years old. She was 25. He was already married, already had a child, and already held one of the most dangerous political positions in occupied Dutch society. As second in command of the NSB, he had personally steered the party toward full ideological alignment with Hitler's Germany, pushing anti-Semitic policies, embracing racism, and championing German expansionism. Their connection was immediate and intense. Within months, he proposed. But even among Nazis, there were complications. Whispers circulated within the SS about Meinoud's racial background, alleged Indian and Black African ancestry, which made him technically suspect under the very racial laws he enforced. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, one of the primary architects of the Holocaust, had to personally review and approve their marriage. Himmler signed off. The wedding took place in December 1940. It was attended by the upper echelons of Dutch fascism, a celebration of power, of ideology, of collaboration. Meanwhile, just weeks earlier, the first anti-Jewish laws had been introduced in the Netherlands. Dutch Jews were being stripped of their civil rights, their jobs, their dignity. One decree at a time. Florentine was there. She knew. She celebrated anyway. In March 1941, Meinoud Rost van Tonningen was appointed president of the Dutch Central Bank. This appointment was not ceremonial, it was surgical. Under his direction, currency barriers between the Netherlands and Germany were torn down. Dutch financial reserves, gold, assets, capital, were systematically transferred to the Third Reich. The Netherlands was being economically strip-mined, and her husband was the instrument. A wartime Allied intelligence report later noted that Meinoud was genuinely convinced of the necessity of a greater European economic space under German leadership, meaning he wasn't just following orders. He was a true believer who executed the looting of his own country with ideological passion. By July 1942, the deportations had begun. Dutch Jews, entire families, elderly people, children, were rounded up and loaded onto freight trains. Destination, Sobibor. Auschwitz, Treblinka. Of the approximately 107,000 Dutch Jews deported, an estimated 102,000 were murdered. The Netherlands had one of the highest Jewish death rates of any Western European country under Nazi occupation. Florentine Rost van Tonningen lived through every single day of this, hosted guests, raised 3 sons, attended NSB gatherings, and said nothing. In 1944, as Germany began losing the war, Meinoud doubled down, joining the Waffen-SS, the military arm of the SS. In March 1945, with the war weeks from ending, he was deployed to the front lines as an SS Obersturmführer, the equivalent of a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army. Florentine fled with the children to Goslar, Germany, where her parents owned property. She ran toward the collapsing Reich even as it burned around her. May 8, 1945. Nazi Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Meinoud Rost van Tonningen was captured by Canadian forces and transferred to the Dutch prison at Scheveningen, nicknamed by inmates the Orange Hotel, to await trial for treason and war crimes. He never made it to that trial. On June 6, 1945, exactly 1 year after D-Day, Meinoud Rost van Tonningen fell from a prison staircase and died. The official finding: suicide. He allegedly jumped over a stair railing. Florentine spent the rest of her life, 62 more years, rejecting that conclusion entirely. She insisted he was murdered. Her argument: as president of the Dutch Central Bank during the occupation, Meinoud had intimate knowledge of black market financial transactions that implicated powerful, well-connected individuals who were desperate to stay hidden in post-war Dutch society. In her autobiography, she made an accusation explosive enough to rock the Dutch establishment. She named Prince Bernhard, husband of Queen Juliana, as bearing primary responsibility for her husband's death. Prince Bernhard, war hero, resistance symbol, beloved royal figure, accused of ordering the murder of a Nazi banker to protect secrets. The accusation was never proven, but it was never fully silenced either, and Florentine made sure of that. In July 1948, Florentine returned to the Netherlands. She was arrested at the border and held for 1 month before being released. She had no income, no stability. She moved in with a cousin in The Hague and managed his household in exchange for lodging. But by 1950, she began receiving a state widow's pension because her husband had technically served in the Dutch parliament as an NSB representative. The same nation he helped occupy was now paying his widow a monthly check. She also inherited a portion of her German family's wealth. She bought a villa in Velp. She launched an electrical company. And then, rather than quietly fading into history, she got louder. Through the 1950s and 1960s, she made multiple television appearances on Dutch national television, praising Hitler and Himmler, disputing Holocaust accounts, and demanding justice for her husband's death. She wasn't hiding in shame. She was building a platform. By the 1970s, her villa had become a physical pilgrimage site for European neo-Nazis and far-right extremists. She hosted solstice rituals styled after Third Reich pagan ceremonies. She maintained close personal relationships with Gudrun Himmler, Heinrich Himmler's daughter, and Paula Hitler, Adolf Hitler's younger sister. The Dutch press, exasperated and appalled, gave her a name that followed her to the grave, the Black Widow. In the early 1980s, her inner circle formalized into an organization called the Consortium de Levensboom, the Tree of Life Consortium, which published a newsletter called Manuscripten, openly promoting National Socialism and Holocaust denial. At its peak circulation, 450 copies. She helped fund far-right electoral efforts in the 1982 Dutch elections, eventually draining her own business finances until the company went bankrupt. She was prosecuted multiple times, fined for distributing anti-Semitic literature, charged with incitement to racial hatred as late as 1992, nearly half a century after the war. In 1986, the Dutch parliament debated stripping her of her widow's pension. They voted. The result? She kept it. Her own children, all three sons, publicly distanced themselves from everything she stood for. They wanted no part of her world. Her final years were spent in Westminster, Belgium. She claimed the Netherlands had become impossible to live in, that she had been forced into exile by a society that refused to forgive her for simply believing what she believed. Florentine Rost van Tonningen died on March 24, 2007. She was 92 years old. There was no public funeral, no memorial service, no tribute, to prevent her burial from becoming a neo-Nazi rally, because that was a genuine documented concern. Her body was quietly transported to the small Dutch town of Rieden, where she had purchased a burial plot for herself in the 1990s. She left behind debts. There was no money to cover the cost of her own funeral. The woman who had lived in villas, hosted Nazi rituals, commanded a European network of extremists, and spent 6 decades escaping accountability, died broke, in exile, and was buried in secret. That is not a tragic ending. That is the only kind of justice history sometimes knows how to deliver. Slow, incomplete, but real. She never stood in a war crimes dock. She was never in prison for her ideology, but she died a figure of scorn, isolated from her own children, exiled from her own country, forgotten by the movement she had given her life to. History remembered her exactly as she deserved to be remembered. Not as a believer or a patriot or a widow, but as a collaborator, a symbol of betrayal, a warning. This has been the Untold Wars, where buried history gets the spotlight it never received. I want to hear from you. Do you think Florentine Rost van Tonningen truly faced justice, or did she escape the punishment she deserved? Drop your answer in the comments. Every single response gets read. Like this video if this story deserves to be told. Subscribe to the Untold Wars and ring that notification bell, because next week we go even deeper. The next story is already waiting for you. Don't miss it.